Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Good evening. I'm Deepika. I'm a volunteer at India DeepTech community, and apart from this, I also lead community initiatives at Blume Ventures. For those of you who do not know, India DeepTech is a pan-industry alliance to promote deep tech startups in India. It brings together all elements of the ecosystem in India under one roof with the objective to enable creation and scaling of more startups focused on scientific research and engineering innovation. This alliance is formed by India's leading deep tech startups, incubators, and venture capital funds, which are involved in working with such startups. The panel today on Wednesday and on Friday are a part of India Deep Tech Liftoff, which is a week-long showcase with some of the best Indian deep tech companies. We also have two more panels happening on Wednesday and Friday on health tech and mobility. Today we have with us some of the best speakers that we could get to talk more about ushering a new industrial revolution. I'll now hand it over to Nishtha so she can introduce the rest of the speakers. But a quick introduction to Nishtha. Nishtha is a best-selling author and has written 2 books on Indian startups. Her latest book, Futurepreneurs, features 10 deep tech and AI companies that are redefining tech in India, and it was launched just very recently in the last month. Her previous book, No Shortcuts, was a bestseller in which she had interviewed successful Indian startups, including Zerodha, Freshworks, and Unacademy. She's on a mission to make business books interesting to read. Nishtha, I'll hand it over to you, but just a couple of things. If any of the attendees have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A section, and Nishtha will take them up during the session or towards the end of the session. Some of you did submit your questions in advance in the form, and that have already been shared with Nishtha. I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Over to you, Nishtha. Please take this from here.
Thank you. Thanks, Deepika. And thanks, everyone, for waiting for us. We do have an exciting session, so let's get started. First of all, thanks to Indian Deep Tech and Arpit and team for coordinating this whole fabulous event and making me a part of it. So while writing my recent book, Futurepreneurs, I've been studying deep tech companies and entrepreneurs for almost last 2 years. And the field is evolving so much in both magnitude and speed. So it's a privilege to be here. My purpose as a moderator today is to bring out the entrepreneurial lessons and opportunities in deep tech, especially in the automation sector. I would like to keep the session highly interactive. So please keep sending your questions and we would love to take them during the session, and we have reserved 20 minutes at the end just for Q&A. So once again, welcome you all. And let me kick this off by introducing our highly accomplished panelists. And let me introduce first the solo investor we have, Sanjay from Blume. Sanjay founded Blume along with Karthik in 2011. He oversees the broad B2B tech space and has managed the investments in Locus, Little Black Book, Tricog, many other successful investments by Blume. Blume has been investing in deep tech when almost we did not even use the term deep tech, right? So I'm sure his comments would help many of the entrepreneurs in our audience today. I'll try to extract from him the secret sauce that he looks for when he's funding the deep tech companies. So a big welcome to you, Sanjay. Super stoked to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks, Nishtha. Thanks, everyone.
Then we have Akash Gupta from GreyOrange, and GreyOrange's warehouse automation robots are helping fulfill millions of e-commerce orders every day throughout the globe. And I also had the pleasure of interviewing Akash in my book. In fact, I keep hearing from the readers of the book how much they have learned from you and Samay, Akash. So a big welcome to you and thanks for joining us from US. Next, I have with me a very special entrepreneur, Aruna Schwarz from Stelae Technologies. Stelae is using pattern recognition algorithms to transform the unstructured content and documents in the industrial sector to the digital industry standards. That's just one part of it. I was fascinated to hear how she started this company with a French co-founder more than a decade ago. And just with 4 people in their team, they are servicing clients like Rolls-Royce, Indian Air Force, Walter Kluwer, and many more. So please welcome Aruna.
Thank you. And looking forward to a scintillating session.
Yes, women power all the way. And then we have Derick from Flutura, who has built an industrial IoT platform tuned for oil and gas, specialty chemicals, and heavy machinery manufacturing industries. Flutura is backed by big global VC firms and strategic partners, out of US, Singapore, and Japan. He is going to share some great insights on creating sales playbooks and getting customers faster. I hope that's correct, Derick, and excited to have you here.
Yeah,
awesome.
Thank you, Nishtha.
Awesome. So let's get started, guys. As I said, please keep sending your questions. So the first thing when I looked at all the panelists, it's not a coincidence that all of our startups in today's panel are nearly a decade old, right? It has taken time for DeepTech to establish its presence and startups to find their product market fit. So my first question is for Akash. How did you zero in on the idea of warehouse automation as opposed to, let's say, other sectors, right? And what factors should a deep tech entrepreneur consider before zeroing in on the sector, according to you?
Yeah, I think we were looking at, back in 2012, 2013, we were looking at multiple industries to see where we would want to create a differentiated, offering that kind of gets powered by in-depth technology. And I think what we were looking at, industries or problem statements that have not been disrupted for long, right? Because, at the end of the day, if you're looking at, creating a differentiated technology offering, I think looking at, problem sets that have not been disrupted for very long, especially when you're looking at B2B space. I think B2C is slightly different, but if you're looking at a B2B space, looking at problem sets, looking at industries that has not seen technology being used for solving those problems. I think that's what we were looking at. And when we looked at, fulfillment, I think, it was very, very clear that, the technology and the developments that has happened in fulfillment were, far too less than how the ecosystem is evolving. I think other aspect that might be useful is that you start looking at, things that are, closer to that particular problem set, because when we were looking at fulfillment, we were looking at two other aspects. We were looking at manufacturing getting better and better every day with IoT 3.0, IoT 4.0, manufacturing was getting better every day. And then e-commerce as well as retail was evolving very, very rapidly, right? As well as the consumer expectation of faster deliveries, more variety and things like that were evolving. So I think it's also helpful to see that if there are, from the industry you are choosing, if the adjacencies are, rapidly changing, which means that the industry itself needs to rapidly change to kind of evolve to the adjacencies, right? And places where you really need to rapidly evolve as the adjacencies are evolving. I think those are, again, a good indicator of that, a deep tech company can, build a differentiator or bring a differentiator out there.
Right. Because I do remember that you guys considered some other sectors as well in the beginning, right? And then you thought that e-commerce, and especially I think one of the points you also mentioned was it was less regulated as well.
Yeah, I think regulation is a very different, aspect of it. I think, and things are becoming better, but, from deep tech perspective, and this was 2012, so startups were not that cool in India at that point of time, so having, deep tech in regulated industry just takes a lot of time. So you got to have that amount of patience as well. And I think at that point of time, the environment we were in, we were thinking that being in a regulated, starting up in a regulated industry means that literally no revenue for good 5 years, because you're gonna, get the certifications and things like that. And then you can, literally see a hockey curve growth, but, you got to have then patience and to kind of wait for 4 or 5 years before you start showing, that level of, you can show market traction, but real revenues, I think, would take 4 or 5 years when you're in the regulated industry. Yeah.
Right. That's a great point. And from that, I feel this is also connected to how Blume funded GreyOrange back then. So I'll move on to you, Sanjay. Let's talk about the secret sauce, right? You are one of the early investors in few deep tech companies, including GreyOrange. What do you look for in a deep tech investment? Like what patterns are you seeing in the winning companies in your portfolio?
Sure. Nishtha, good evening there. I'm also in the US like Akash as we speak. when you were introducing me and introduced me as the solo investor, I thought first you said solo GP. So I was taken aback because I have a very large family, as you know. So by far from being being the sole investor. No, I think you use the word secret sauce, right? I think lots of the audience and everybody knows that the secret sauce is really by the entrepreneur and the founder, right? They're the ones really cooking up special things in the kitchen, and we are just there to sort of help them. But a couple of things, Akash mentioned a very interesting, word that at that time startups weren't cool. And actually, I would say that the successful startups, whether they be any startups or deep techs, are the ones that actually start with a very cool project, right? Something that is very close to their heart. And I think in this case, everybody, and you've written about it extensively, Nishtha, about Akyut, right? That how Samay and Akash had developed that. But I think then they're able to move on, they're able to transition, correct? You start with a cool project which is very close to your heart, especially when it is supported by incubators or college, let's say accelerators. But you're able to convert that from a very cool college project to something tangible, right? Something that has real world huge. I think that's important. And the second is that you're able to graduate that initial problem set into something that's really applicable. Like in this case, you may remember, I think you've written about it also, that Amazon had acquired the company called Kiva, correct? In the similar space. So Akash, I think in one sense, we would all say that, it wasn't the first mover advantage per se, but we also believe in our business that it's not one winner take all, right? You can build a better mousetrap, something that is not just faster, cheaper, better, but has bigger use cases, is more compelling, right? In that sense, it just inspires you. So it doesn't always have to be, the first to market. So coming back to your core question, Nishtha, when you asked about the secret sauce, I would say, I think that passion has to always be there about, some, quote unquote deep tech idea or like a problem set or some technology. But I think the secret sauce comes in then the ability to convince a very key bunch of stakeholders, right? Investors come last, but it is some initial pilot customers and then some customers and then your initial hires, right? Beyond just the two founders who are also very, very interested in that idea, right? And making a difference using that idea. And then I think the investors. So I think in this case, I think BITS has always been a very big supporter of tech and deep tech, and that of course helped. But then, like Akash was saying, the initial use cases when they hit upon warehousing automation, started talking to Flipkart and other customers like that. So I would say all those ingredients come together in that secret sauce, and both we were really impressed. We said, "Wow, these." It's interesting, right? These two young college kids know exactly what they want to do. Without that, they didn't have a first job. This was their first job. But you have to be able to translate that cool college project into a real world sort of a business plan.
Right. Right. So a big takeaway there, that don't just treat it like a cool project, but get to early validation, talk to customers and all those things. Thanks, Sanjay. Let me move on to Derick. And I quote this from our discussion, Derick. You mentioned that one of your first clients came from a blog post you guys wrote, right?
Oh, yeah. That's true.
So, and you also mentioned like you did not have any network per se in ultimately the sectors that you were targeting, like, and now you have cracked sectors like energy, defense, and so on, and some big clients there. What are two things you think you have done well to get here? Like, what's the playbook you follow?
Sure. So initially, we were also excited with a lot of technology. We were shiny algorithms looking for a problem, and we got hit badly, I would say. And then we had to go back to the drawing board. And one of the things we learned as a part of the process was getting a very clear line of sight to the budgets which are going to be spent. Okay, creating a buyer budget map, if you will. And that's not easy information to elicit. It requires a lot of conversations, informal, out of the conference room conversations. And that is something which it's more of an art, but we learned over a period of time, is to essentially recreate a high-level view of the buyer budget map, which will help you understand, what are the problems which are rank ordered based on the money which is being allocated, not based on what they say, because what they say and how much they're spending, there's a big disconnect many a times, at least in the industrial sector. So that was one deep learning we had. So these are all things which we did, what I call the willingness to pay, testing the willingness to pay for a product before it hits the market. And also the other lever which we pulled was to verticalize a little deeply. So we had apps which solved refinery emission problem. We baked a lot of domain along with the API, so to speak, AI, so to speak. So cooking the domain with the AI, verticalizing the applications, and testing willingness to pay helped a lot in deciding whether this is a product worth taking to the market, this pre-product market phase. Once you got a resonance in the marketplace, then you have to accelerate sales. So we tried two playbooks. One is some of these industrial sectors are still procurement happens because someone, the old boys networks, told them to buy so. So we had to get into that small cartel, so to speak. And most of the time, the decision makers are taken at CXO level, not even at a VP level. So we had to hire some retired oil and gas folks, incentivize them to get access to Houston Petroleum Club, for example. Okay. And then work our way into that network. So it's about 30, 40 people. If they get to understand you, then you get an audience. And so if you go top down, it's easier than going middle up. So that is something which we did, helped us get a couple of mega deals, I would say. But it's not a scalable model from a sales perspective. It's very high touch, long drawn process. One of the things we are doing currently is we're also doing product-led growth, which is essentially you don't need a salesman. The product sells by itself by self-loading. So trying to do a kind of a freemium model for the industrial sector. The industrial sector is not used to experiencing free things and then selling. So they're used to experiencing value in months. So we're trying to bring it down to days and sometimes in hours itself. So they can take a lightweight version, a snackable version of the product, download it, experience it, and then if the product sells itself. So that is something new to this category. So while it's very common in the B2B space and the B2C space, but in the industrial side, it's not a very common pattern to download something and experience an outcome first. So that's the other extreme, trying a very low touch. So in a nutshell, I think willingness to pay, product-led growth, and getting into cartels.
Cool. Cool. Thanks, Derick. So let me move on to Aruna and let's change the gears a bit, right? So Stelae has not raised any institutional funding, right? So my question is, why did you choose that route and how has that served you in the long run? Any insights there?
I mean, it wasn't a conscious decision. Of course, I was like totally depressed that nobody, the big boys didn't want, or the big VCs didn't want to fund us. But then I think my mentor, investor, philosopher, guide, and my former boss, who I knew for 30 years, he said, SAP and Oracle were not built on investor money. So get a grip now and focus on what you as a person, which is me, knows to do best is to bring business in. And that bringing business was the first customer that we cracked in the UK in the defense sector. So even though we're not institutionally funded, we do, I think I have about 35 angel investors, some angel investor clubs, and in Europe, in Israel, in the US, and in India. So one of my business partners, my investor, and a very close business acquaintance that I'd known for the last 20 years, came to us with this huge defense manufacturer who I can't name in the UK, and told us that whatever product that we've been selling in the media and publishing sector, whether we could adapt the algorithms to the technical world or to engineering documentation. So with my co-founder Pierre in France, who's an innovator, brilliant man, doctorate mathematician from and from the best schools in France, we were very, very clear that we would build a set of algorithms that could tailor to multiple industries in document transformation. So the core patterns is like a Cisco black box. That doesn't change. Some things might have to change. So in fact, this defense manufacturer funded our R&D, and then we eventually sold a license to them. And the thrill of getting a purchase order is, for me, and for my investors and co-founders, is way higher than had we raised $10 million or $20 million. The second thing, not raising too much money at the beginning, which I had seen in some of my other startup companies in France at the time, because what is now DeepTech in 2011, 12, and again, from my background, what I call is enterprise software. So hardware, whether it's deep or narrow or not, I'm not sure, but it's hardcore. You're selling to companies, you're selling to corporates, you're selling to industries. So from my experience there, what I learned as a personal lesson is that the first customers that you bring on board can only come from your deep connects. Derick also touched upon a cartel. So, so my business partner, but also an investor, was an established figure in the UK in the aerospace business. And that's how we got that. We would have never have gone there had we knocked on, or we would have taken huge amounts of time had we knocked on multiple doors to get into the big Blume company that we talked about. So contacts, deep connects, and your ability, it's not the product, because, assuming that you have the right product for the right market, you need to be in the right place with the right decision makers. And in the engineering sector in Europe, I cannot talk much about the US, but I'm assuming it's the same, is that they will not work, they will only, you think you've cracked the whole deal, but the local vendor that's sitting just outside the gates of an Airbus or an Alstom will be the one who will seal the deal, because they've been working together for 30 years. So we realized very quickly, again, with my enterprise software background and with some of my investors, the only way to market is channel partners. Now, those channel partners could be an Accenture, but the more effective ones that we've seen are small regional partners sitting outside the gates of some of the big industrial powerhouses in France, in Germany. So, and we had limited, I guess had we raised a lot of money, I would have built a big sales team and, gone to all the conferences, etc., and tried to sell direct, but we didn't have that we didn't have that luxury. I'm not making it all glamorous. It's a tough job, when you're trying to live on customer money. And we did raise money, but as I said, only in stage rounds for very specific reasons. And again, not all investors will bring business. I told you I have 35 of them. Some of them will just be a shoulder that I can cry on when I'm having a bad day. Some will bring business, but all these people I've had for the last 12 years. And there's a network within a network.
Right.
So the only way to sell, you could use your LinkedIn and send out direct mails. I mean, I really get upset when I get direct mails from, totally unknown strangers, but you need that deep personal connect into a cartel, and especially in the kind of industry that I'm working in aerospace and defense. One, it's a very male-dominated industry, which is okay because you stand out as a woman. So, that's great. They never forget you, which is one thing, and is really to penetrate those networks. Otherwise, the first customers and the channel partners will not come.
Right. And that's a good message. Also, I think being an AI company, I think you could manage that, without raising investment, you have been able to grow wonderfully. So that's like a good example to have in the sector, I feel.
Okay, but others have and done it differently. This is my playbook.
Right.
But I can tell you that every time I, was writing business plans to raise money was the time I took my eyes off the business. So it's a choice.
Fair enough. Yeah, right. Absolutely. So we are almost, I think, half the way in already. Let's move on to the next round. And Sanjay, I'll start with you. In which areas would you advise Indian founders to build and go alone, versus where do you suggest that they find partners to expand? So do you want to talk about sectors, opportunities for Indian companies to disrupt and how to go about it?
Sure. Again, Nishtha, I'll say that, as investors, we always looking, we are not, I mean, I don't have a list of prescriptive sectors per se. Aruna talked very passionately about making inroads into a really coming, Aruna, as an outsider, right, into industry and breaking into it. I think that's what we're looking for, right? Always backing founders who are passionate and figuring out those sectors themselves. But a couple of just thoughts here. A lot of us get very interested in what I'll call quote unquote glamorous industries. But if you look at it, that I'd say that uh, one of the biggest beneficiaries of new tech is the old economy, right? Or old tech, if you will. We are all in one sense startups, and you feel that startups are the best ones to sell to. But if you think about it, that when I say old economy, I mean traditional businesses. I mean, look at Akash and Samay at GreyOrange. If you look at warehousing, you look at manufacturing. These are really old. I mean, this is logistics, this is industrial. But in one sense, it is the most ripe for change, right? Because it's not really innovated, for decades maybe. And in that sense, I think, Derick used an interesting word about shiny algorithms going looking for a problem. You sometimes have to look in other areas, right? Not just the people you know. So I'll take a couple of examples. Coming back to the question, if you look at like space tech, for example, I think again, using Pixel as an example, which a lot of you are familiar with, which you've written extensively, where Akash is also like a mentor. Um, I would say it's a bit of both. I think ISRO is doing wonderful work, pioneering work, and it's very important everybody in space tech to be very closely aligned with them. But to Aruna's point, in one sense, if you really have global aspirations, you literally don't limit yourself, right? Like France is extremely well known in aerospace and defense, and so is the US in part. So you really want to reach out, right? Sometimes you may actually have the best technology in the product, but people just don't know you. Say, oh, we just funded somebody else, or we just gave this customer contract. We didn't know that you existed. So it's very important to reach out and do more than just marketing. I think on the whole, disrupting deep. If you look at something as arcane, or not arcane really, but look at shop floor automation, right? There's so much inefficiencies around, let's say, wastage or like shelf life of products or old machines or machining tools. And if you look at even within the warehousing, there's so many subsystems. You've got, one could say, you've got land robots, and you have drones, and you have even things moving in the air. So I would say that old tech or the old economy is a very good place to look at, because chances are that they're still sticking to something that they've done. And Aruna used the word like a cartel or old boys network. They've the delta for there could be the biggest, right? So warehousing, industrials, other sectors like that. But it's really for the best entrepreneurs to figure that out.
Right. Cool.
Nishtha, sorry.
Yeah.
Another point you asked about the question, I think Aruna also talked about resellers. I would say consulting firms and SIs are also very, very important to partner with. If you go and talk to a consulting firm, very often they're consulting with a client, and they'll essentially deliver a plan and a PowerPoint to the client. But the client's really asking for them more than that, right? Okay, you give me a plan. Now connect me to actually technology vendors or startups that help with that. So I think to your question about where to go it alone and partner, I think partnering with resellers, consulting partners, SIs is very important, because they can help you get to the client and they can't do what you do.
Right. No, I think Aruna also made this point, and I think it's a good direction if anyone wants to follow up with Aruna later on. I think how she has leveraged her channel partners and other angles nicely. Cool. Thanks, Sanjay. Akash, I want to talk a little bit about the technology aspect, especially you're the CTO, right? So deep tech founders can sometimes get stuck in that perfecting the product kind of thing, right? They are in love with the technology and they just want to keep improving it. So, and you guys started serving global clients very early on. So can you give some insights to, especially to tech founders or entrepreneurs we might have in the audience, like how to build the right features and also know that how many features are enough?
Yeah, no, I think the balance is pretty hard, especially in the early on days, right? And also, now when we build new products, there's always selling features and value giving features, and I think earlier I thought that wasn't true, but I can assure that that's true. There are selling features and there are value driven features, right? And I think as a MVP, when you are trying and understanding the set of customers. I think the first thought is to keep your scope, at least your problem statement or use case as narrow as possible, right? Because then you don't need to build a hell lot to kind of solve for that, use case, right? And again, some of these mistakes we did early on, where you want to just make sure that you're solving one use case. You're not looking for solving that use case in all the industries and all geographies. You would want to solve for one use case, one industry, one geography. It might be extendable for other geographies, but you would want to try and do that. And then I think other aspect that in enterprise business and similarly deep tech businesses you would want to take care of is that there has to be some bit of vertical integration that is normally needed, else there are too many pieces and it becomes very hard to kind of get to the customers. So you can't completely cut corners and say you have just one small piece, because then it becomes very hard to kind of get through. But I think my thought process has been that surgically solve for one use case, one industry, and one geography, and get that right, and do whatever you need to do that. Get to the customer as early as possible. It doesn't matter at what revenue or at what pricing to begin with. Get your customer to your customer as soon as possible. Yes, do avoid pilots, because the pilots defeat the purpose of what we are trying to do, right? Because in pilots the customers are not really pushing hard for getting the right value, right? So avoid pilots. Try and get into a production level system, which is important for the customer, as early as possible, and then try and use a solve for a use case that is very I would say focused.
Interesting. And this is why I love talking to entrepreneurs. I get to hear like so many different things. Some people swear by pilots, and Akash is just like saying that pilots may not be the best way to go forward. So and that's the beautiful part of it. I think like everyone has figured out their journey in some ways differently. So thanks for adding that perspective, Akash. Let me move on to, so Aruna, I mean, you are doing so many things incredibly, 4-member team, incredible revenues, incredible clients, as cracking these kind of sectors, being like a women founder in there. So tell me, you were also telling me you have been doing some interesting marketing stories, the way you, especially having not raised the institutional funding and not too much cash to begin with, how did you guys market your services especially in the early days?
Again, as I said, it's the contacts. It's the network, it's the deep professional contacts, the reseller part. The SIs are extremely important, and it may not be the big SIs, but small ones. I mean, we work with a company called 4D Concept. No one's ever heard of them, but they're one of the largest vendors to a big aerospace aircraft manufacturing company in France. And they sit right outside the doorsteps of that company, and they've been there 30 years. So getting into that network was, but the most important thing I think that we did, or rather again did with one of my investors and partners who knew the US market, but it's got nothing to do with the US, was how we positioned ourselves to sell one of the largest use cases of document conversion in the Indian defense to the Global Aerospace Industries Conference. So there's a conference that happens. It hasn't happened for 2 years, but it's going to happen again in June in the US. It's run by the Aerospace Industries of Europe and Aerospace Industries of America. It was to get to be a speaker there. So 2015, we were I went with my partner who's half Spanish, half Chinese, a quarter Mexican. Anyway, there were only 2 women there, and I think they thought we were the Mexican maids for coffee or something, but whatever. Once we went on stage, that was it. So that was our first experience, the first time they ever had a small company. The only other kind of speakers besides the US Army, Air Force, etc., were the big vendors. We're talking IBM type vendors, small company and an Indian company. They'd never even thought there was software. That was 2015. And since then, we've been invited to every other conference, the last being in 2019. So that has really driven a lot. We don't do any outbound calling, as I said, driven in partners. So we have two kinds besides the SIs, also complementary technology vendors who are a fit with our software. So we have a couple of them. So that was, huge. So we do go, every year except the last 2 years, because all the aerospace industry conferences are face-to-face. There's no virtual because it's a networking for all boys, again, at the same time. So that has been amazing for us. The second was we won a challenge run by Deutsche Bahn, the German railway, in 2020 January. And again, we were the only Indian company there. The challenges were well defined. That also gave us, that exposure. So really getting stands and in big exhibitions. Anyway, we didn't have the money for it, but getting a speaker slot at the conferences really was, I think, a little different from what a lot of people can do. And the other thing is we're talking partners here to resell our product. So, we're always on the look. And these are the kind of events where even though the direct customers come in, maybe like a Lockheed Martin might come in, but they'll chat with you and leave. They won't buy from you, but they'll buy from, company X that's sitting outside their gates somewhere in the US. So speaker slot, very important. But again, it's chicken and egg because you need to have something to speak about and you need to have like some big customer references. So the Indian defense use case we've touted pretty much globally at every conference. And now we're looking, for something new. The second thing is being part of a defense ecosystem. We cannot bid directly because of all whether it's the US, German, whatever. So again, having the right defense partners who, again, as Derick would say, is it really a cartel? Okay, we're not talking, I'm not going to mention what they're like, but it's a real cartel. You need to know them and they need to trust you. So the more, besides all the good things, having a great product, etc., you have to put your money where your mouth is. They need to know your product works. For the Indian defense big project that we worked with the channel partner, the reference came from the defense manufacturer in the UK. It's a very small world. So we're not just aerospace defense, we do rail transportation and now medical. Any product that needs to be repaired, we are in there. We have to be in there because of the documentation issues. So yeah, so be very focused. Your product needs to be very focused too. We only do one thing, which is transforming documents to digital outputs. We don't venture into analytics, etc., etc. So yeah, your product, trust. Again, more important than anything is the trust that your partners have in you. And I can tell you in the last 2 years where we've not set a foot outside, well, pretty much my home, we've done our biggest revenue traction, but again, only from people that we've been assiduously cultivating for the last 3 years and who've already seen me. Us means me and maybe my partner, Pierre. And again, a very important factor, the fourth person in my team only joined us in Feb 2020, like a month before the pandemic, but again comes with 18 years in the aerospace business. So that again, we are consciously building up the trust factor. And I think he's actually listening to us as well on the conference. So
awesome. We are just nearing, I think, the 45-minute mark. So let me ask this last question to Derick and we will start taking more questions from audience. So meanwhile, guys, if you have any question, please drop it in because I'll be taking this soon after this question. Derick, this is important. I know this is this is very close to your heart as well. And you are passionate about helping the Indian deep tech ecosystem grow globally as well. And especially all these deep tech business, we need to have global clients. So in our discussion, you pointed out how Korean and German accelerators are doing it so well for their startups, right? As a founder, what kind of support would you ask from bodies like Indian Deep Tech, government or other bodies to help you guys? What kind of help are you looking for? What support?
Yeah, good question. So I would say probably 3 simple things to start off with. I think if we execute 3 simple things, we should be able to get some multiplier effect. One is, so in the defense, whenever you procure, let's say, massive amount, let's say from France, Rafale jets, there is a defense offset clause which mandates that you have to, that company has to spend so much into Indian manufacturers. If we have a digital offset clause, let's say, the digital offset clause, for example, we are procuring a lot of oil and gas from Houston, we are procuring a lot of natural gas from Qatar. So if you have a digital offset clause in that procurement, which mandates that you have to do 10% of whatever we pay to you in foreign exchange, have to be spent on local startups. That could have a solid multiplier effects. All of them are spending on robotics and drones or maintenance and inspections and stuff like that. So instead of going to the valley, probably they could source it from India because they spent, India has bought so much forex. So institutionalizing a digital offset clause into large forex spend could go along. It's a simple insertion into a procurement clause, I would say, and a little bit of negotiation. And the second other thing is similar to what, so the Korean and German accelerators, I saw them come to university in Palo Alto. So every week there was some company or the other, most of them couldn't speak English and they were selling to the semiconductor fab industry. What they found was that the governments had invested in people who would actively advance their stories and get face time. So it was kind of a shared sales approach which the government had invested in. It goes beyond having events, which is actively investing in hustlers who would get face time with very specific people within the semiconductor fab network. And that enabled them, so they would walk out at least getting a pilot, paid pilot, so to speak. But that gave them some way for a startup which was undiscovered in Seoul to at least test out their product with LSA logic, for example. And I think, and we do have a large diaspora out there. So who act as decision makers. All it requires is some active investment in terms of advancing our stories. The third is, if you look at CB Insights and TechCrunch, these are the two influential publications which influence VCs and the community out there, right? So if you are able to take at least 10 of our Kohinoor startups, like RT Motors, Stella, and all of them, and give them the story of their vision and actual execution. And if they get featured, it's not difficult. Just take 10 Kohinoors and make sure that you have some beautiful stories which can be featured by CB Insights, and you'll automatically get natural pull there. So I think digital offset clause, investing in hustlers there, and at least some kind of breakthrough with CB Insights and TechCrunch. Yeah.
No, I hope that happens, and looking for more exposure for our startups for sure. I'm going to read out some questions from the audience now, and whoever in the panel feels like answering it, please let me know. These are not addressed to anyone in particular. So here's a question like, somebody's asking, the DeepTech Liftoff is being stumped by lack of depth in manufacturing. Example of wearables startup in Bangalore with great use cases is 90% dependent on components from China, as basic electronics manufacturing is missing. How do we solve for this? Anybody would like to take that?
I'll take it. I think at the end of the day, I would say the solving for it is looking for, more alternative, manufacturing. I don't think as a young company, you could wait really that, okay, when the manufacturing scene in India, which should take, a decade almost to kind of get to a point where we would like it to be. I think at the end of the day, it is all about, working very closely with an Indian vendor. I think, in the very beginning, I think one thing we also started doing differently, which really helped us, was that, how we think about this is do a prototyping with a set of vendors, and then when it comes to manufacturing, go and talk to these big vendors. I think what we can do differently, and at GreyOrange, we started that, almost 4 or 5 years back, where we, literally took a vendor, whether from India or China, from prototyping to the production stage together, right? Literally making the manufacturing processes with him and things like that. So I think, don't think about, prototyping and production as like two completely different set of vendors, especially at the pace at which you need to develop technology in these days. I think best is to find a couple of vendors, right, and work with them from the prototyping journey to the production journey. And in that way, of course, you're pretty much being the part of creating that manufacturing ecosystem in India, but also, I would say you're trying to build a partner who's going to grow with you and who's going to work with you. So I think, taking a couple of Indian vendors that who might not be producing in that scale and things like that, and working with them together to get there might be a suggestion. And if you can't find one, of course, I would never say hurt your business by not using current vendors you have.
Okay, thanks, Akash. Here's this question. What's the scope of industrial automation in India? Though new startups are popping up in this space, there's less pull from the market, at least in waste management industry. How can the equation be balanced?
From an India perspective, so we had initially focused on US and Europe markets. Last 2 years, we started focusing on the Indian markets. We did a lot of experiments in multiple industries to figure out where there is traction. But finally, what we have found traction is in two specific verticals. One is defense, because there is a mandate, of course, to localize, and they're thinking differently about it. So defense, we are seeing a lot of traction. We are working with BEL, we are working with the Nuclear Submarines Group in Visakhapatnam and stuff like that. The other area where we are seeing traction is pharma manufacturing. Again, there is a mandate to digitize because FDA is getting tighter and tighter. So wherever there is an external mandate acting on that as a very compelling force on that industry, there is solid traction. There's a willingness to spend. And we found willingness to spend in pharma and defense. Other industries, I think I don't know, but it's still, let me see it. No, they're not actively budgeted for it. You'll get access to an innovation budget max. But that's been our experience. These two verticals, we are seeing traction. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Derick. Where we would like to see India's role in industrial revolution in next 5 years? That's sort of open-ended. Anybody, any takers?
Yeah, I can take that. It's a nice sort of call to action, right? If you think about we had obviously it was a sad sort of event, the passing away of Naren Gupta, right, of Nexus, one of the founders of Nexus. But the reason I bring up that name is that he literally helped put sort of Indian SaaS on the map, right? You looked at Indian SaaS startups that came actually on the global map. And I think it's a good call. It's an interesting call to action where if you look at in one sense, you had the industrial revolution, and now you have digital transformation. But this question is essentially tying these two pieces together, right? You're using digital transformation to transform that. And, we've always talked about our economy being more services and China being, manufacturing, right? In that sense, and us being more about product innovation. But actually, it's interesting. It's really, when you look at all these, the great founders I have as my co-panelists, it is really that product innovation, and Derick was talking about PLG, that can transform the industrial revolution and automation. So in that sense, I think this meshing of software innovation to transform industrial and manufacturing is a great opportunity for India, and remote has made that even easier, correct? Today, none of us, it doesn't really matter where we are on the Zoom. So it's actually a really interesting opportunity for India to be the sort of bellwether and pioneer in that. I'm sure if any of the founders also want to add to that.
I just want to add one.
Sorry. Yes, it is. But unless you're known and unless there's visibility, I don't think we'll be doing any pioneering. I'll just give you a small example. At the Deutsche Bahn, finals, and when we were the only Indian company, actually one of the one of the Deutsche Bahn employees, there was about 200 of them, and they said, "Are you cheap? Because you're from India." Cheap as in cheap software, which I had to tell him in no uncertain terms that being Indian wasn't cheap. And then when I show the slides of my co-founding team, there was Pierre Fraisse, who's European, and then he's like, "Sorry, you have a European co-founder. So the perception of Indian software is, well, there is a very low perception because it's all, as Sanjay said, a service business. But we really need to bring the visibility up of, hardcore, robust products that won't fall apart, in a week's time.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one of the advantages we have as a cluster, Bangalore as a cluster has what I call the density advantage. Probably if you look at it, this is probably one of the few places in the world where gray hair meets ponytail. you had gray hair people who know electromechanical, aeronautics, defense, 20 years, grinding the same thing. And they are very intimate with problem statements. Okay, and you can find them at International Society for Automation, which happens in Marathali, for example. But they have never met the ponytail guys in Koramangala and in Thanagar. We just have to build a bridge between these two folks. And so that advantage exists. So we have a critical mass of capability where there's an intimate understanding of problem statements and the digital capability. That doesn't exist in the US. For example, Houston doesn't have a critical mass of AI people or digital people as well as Palo Alto has. So that cross-pollination is not possible. Whereas in Bangalore, it's possible. The only thing requiring is that discoverability. So as Aruna pointed out, we have to put a lot of efforts into getting discovered, and whatever tools we need to pull to do that is where we need to spend.
Right. I'll just take one more questions. What are the hurdles you foresee in moving organizations to the next industrial revolution? Is it technology, ROI, people, or something else? Anybody wants to take this?
Nishtha, can you repeat the question again? Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, somebody's asking what are the hurdles you foresee in moving organizations to the next industrial revolution? Is it technology, ROI, people, or something else?
This is from the customer end, I'm assuming, right? Like adoption by
I guess, yeah, it's very open-ended, yeah.
Just taking an example in the aerospace manufacturing industry or the general aerospace avionics industry, we are in very kind of as Sanjay would say, in kind of a low-tech, it's a high-tech product, but in a low-tech process, which is taking documents that are, if an aircraft comes on the ground, you're taking documents, multiple types, and taking 4 days to copy and paste it into an engineering order or into a bill of material for your warehouse, right? Which is taking 4 days. And people have talked about digital transformation, but all that didn't really happen. But now what's happening is they want that 4 days compressed into a few hours so that the aircraft can start getting repaired and spend less time on the ground. So there is a huge driving force in what was a low-tech thing that could be copied and pasted into automating that. So, it's been a great, so there is enormous scope in our software, which could have been perceived as something for, not a very hot AI digital transformation thing. Getting documents digitized, not even digitized, into creating digital outputs from documents is a big thing. So there are budgets that, but if you go to the corporate innovation lab of some big company, they would never have thought of it. But now those guys have less power because the budgets are with the business owners. The person who wants to reduce spending 4 days on document processing to a few hours. So there is a huge amount, and that too in any manufacturing industry. So pick a process, that's being done manually, that was not considered kind of cool, but stick to that. Build a product that can automate a not very cool process. And also the other message that I would like to say when you're talking to engineering guys, talking even to your channel partners in the engineering team, they don't care about shiny algorithms, AI, digital transformation, ML, but can you cut costs? Can you increase speed of a process? Would be a better message than a sales deck which has every technology known to mankind, presented there.
Right. Just an interesting data point. As I was researching for the book, there was a study that said 40% of the European startups claiming to be AI had nothing AI about them. So, right. So let's stick to solving problems, and AI can be a good way of doing it. when appropriate. So if we have touched 1 hour mark, so I'm just going to take parting comments from all of you. 1 or 2 lines of advice, parting advice for the deep tech entrepreneurs listening to us. Let me start with you, Sanjay.
Sure. I think, my co-panelists also, I just want to pick on a couple of words. I think Derick used words shiny algorithms, and Aruna also talked about, ROI, because you can have the best products out there. I think the opportunity for what I would tell founders, the opportunity for deep tech founders is it has a unique opportunity where you can really differentiate yourself with some IP, right? More than just your ARR and growth. It is some secret sauce that is very unique to you. If you look at SaaS just by itself, it's all about the ARR and growth, right? There isn't that much option to differentiate, but here there is a secret sauce that can stay with you. So I think stick to that. But it's very important to find transition from a very, very cool project and a cool idea and the shiny algorithm to a real business problem. That's, I think, the advantage and the opportunity that deep tech has. So just focus on that.
Cool. Thanks, Sanjay. Derick, can we go to you next?
Yeah, just 2 things. Always test willingness to pay. Let the customers put some skin in the game, either in terms of sharing some data or giving at least some token advance. Then it's serious. The second is verticalize. I think a lot of horizontal platforms are coming. You can say I'm the first in the industry to do XYZ for refining operations. First AR, VR for mining, for example. So verticalize maybe at an industry level or at a process level. So your positioning stands out. So verticalize and willingness to pay. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Aruna, how about you?
Again, 2 things. Only because Derick said 2, I would have said 1. The most important thing is when you're picking your partners, whether it's SI partners, business partners, referral partners globally, has to please, there's so many sharks, vultures. Sorry, sharks is the wrong word. Too many vultures out there because you have to have someone you trust implicitly or somebody who knows because otherwise you can really get, he won't have a very happy partner experience. And the second thing is, Derick talked about verticalization. Pick a process that you can solve and stick to it to build your product IP, whether it's AI, ML, NLP, doesn't matter. But you really have to, and try again, instead of deeply verticalizing the industry, pick a process that's across industry, but stick to that process, whether it's whatever it is. Otherwise, you're going to have a product that has too many bells and whistles, will do too many things, and you prove nothing. And finally, no one's going to buy it. And again, you're not IBM or SAP. They took 50 years to get where they are. So stick to one major pain point, and that will only come if you have experience within industry, is my opinion.
Thanks, Aruna. And just a question has popped up, which I feel like taking. So I hope if any one of you can chime in on this. Raghuttama Rao is asking, and I believe, is it you, Raghu from CDC? In India, most large corporates do not have a coherent strategy for engaging with deep tech startups. Without these kind of active partnerships, deep tech startups will have a hard time in scaling. Any suggestions, thoughts on how to ease this problem? So helping corporates engage with deep tech startups, what can we do there to facilitate that partnership?
From my experience, having been in 2 of those, the corporate innovation groups are always kind of have to be there because it's nice to have, and it's a different team that has no deep business connects within the budget holders. So while it's a good way to get known and to build your network of contacts, you will have to struggle, or not struggle, it will take a long time for that to translate into actual purchase orders and sales. You might get a corporate innovation budget to, build something and present it on demo day, where a lot of people will be there, but it will actually not translate into business. So in my opinion, even more effective than the corporates are the big SIs, who have deeper connects within the corporate and know where the budgets are and know where the money is.
I would like to reemphasize Sanjay's point. Sanjay made an interesting point saying that, so for example, the Accentures, the McKinseys, and the Booz Allen Hamiltons of the world shape the digital strategy for a lot of Indian manufacturing entities now. At the end of the day, what they deliver is a PPT, and they want to operationalize what is there in the PPT into an actual thing. So that's one place, actively partnering with some of these consulting companies, which have a commercial interest in executing on what they put on a PPT, would also be a good strategy. Yeah.
Sanjay, you want to add anything to it?
No, I think the last thing is we just need more, success stories and role models coming out of it, right? I think, Nishtha, whether it is your book or all the panelists here and just becoming, I think we've not talked about the aspect of mentoring. Now, this is interesting, right? Aruna, the people who reach out to you are also always looking for role models, right? Not just a woman founder and a CEO, but somebody who's piecing all that together. So I think that's also, a way to give back, because if you look at some of the other industries, like let's say a fintech or the other, it's very easy to get to those. I think our industry is less well understood. So I think IDT or other forums here, Aruna used the word, whether it was cartel or whether, but I think the point is it's about reference points, right? It's all about being trusted. Think about what we do, right? You're finding LPs that trust a VC to give you money to then go and back startups. It's exactly that. You're creating enough reference points. So I think this, everybody here, sort of becomes a reference point, as a mentor, and just helps more. We just need a steady stream, a greater stream of deep tech startups coming out here, and to create those reference points, to keep giving back, so it becomes like a flywheel, right? And just builds on that.
And no, I hope also we strengthen the university research and the corporate angle as well. I love how, BITS students are definitely many more startup stories are coming from there. So they are definitely seeming to do something right. Cool. I think we can go on and on, but I guess I have to end it now. This was an absolute privilege. Thanks to all of you. And thanks for having me. I'm going to pass the mic back to Deepika. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Nishtha. I'm going to begin with just a quick note of thanks to the speakers. Thanks, Aruna, Derick, and Sanjay, for taking the time out and speaking to the community today. It was a very interesting conversation, totally worth recording, and I'm glad I did.